watching Bread and Roses, a weekly political social magazine that's broadcast in English and Persian via New Channel TV. Hello everyone, I'm Mariam Namazi.
And I'm Fatwa. In this week's programme, we'll be discussing pro-imperialist left. We'll be interviewing Mariam Helaluka, the founder of Secularism is a Woman's Issue.
In Shocking News of the Week, we'll be talking about another hacking to death of a Bangladeshi blogger with the name of Rahman. In the Insane Fatwa of the Week, it's from ISIS. And if you're going to play table football, you better decapitate the little plastic men first.
The good news of the week is from Sweden again. The campaign to end the ban on women entering stadiums in Iran is spreading.
Stay with us. The role of the left is to be partisan and take sides with progressive social forces. However, the postmodernist, anti-imperialist so-called left sides with the Islamists and participates in the elimination of progressive movements and freethinkers in the Middle East, North Africa and South Asia. This left, and I really think we shouldn't call them left anymore, this so-called left is siding with the Islamists and in reality aiding and abetting and justifying and apologizing for the murder of freethinkers and progressive social movements in countries across the world, from the Middle East to South Asia and North Africa.
I think you made an important point. Should we call them left or not? I don't think they're left. Historically, they're anti-colonialist, the supporter of the nationalist movement for independence, and now they morphed with the Islamist movement, because the whole nationalist movement in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Southeast Asia, they merged into Islamist movement. They're very close with each other. And I think these groups are supporters of that movement, and they're now part and parcel of the Islamist movement. The difference is that now the Islamist movement is a fascist movement. And they are supporters of fascists. So they're a very dangerous group, I think, for society. And in Europe, you'll see them, they're always sitting side by side with the Islamists, and usually the right-wing section of the Islamist movement, the most sort of fascist and
the whole Islamist movement is right-wing.
But absolutely. But these are the most horrible groups. They have no shame of supporting them, and they need to be exposed as part and parcel of a right-wing movement, an emergence of a right-wing movement in Middle East and North Africa.
There's nothing progressive anymore about them at all. I mean, there was some. Well, it was justified to support anti-colonial movements, but now they look at Islamists as a sort of force for resistance and a revolutionary force, where in fact they're a counter-revolutionary force. They are responsible for suppressing revolutions, for slaughtering freethinkers and progressive movements, for attacking the working class in many countries, and they're standing side by side with this movement.
Yeah, and they pretend to be somehow anti-establishment. It's always these elements of a fascist movement who goes against some sort of rules and regulation. Even when you look at the right-wing movements in Europe, there's always that sort of anti-establishment element within that. And the same sort of groups in Middle East and North Africa, there's some sort of structure and establishment, and they side by that, and they try to pretend there's an element of progressive. There's progressive elements in this. There isn't actually.
And what's interesting is this so-called left has this sort of affinity with Islam and Islamism in the way that they might not necessarily have it with Judaism or Christianity. They do see it as sort of a repressed or the oppressed religion, and they see Islamism as a force, for resistance in a sense, which it's not at all in any shape and form.
And this is part of the narrative that Islamists try to peddle in society, and they've bought into this.
I mean, it's interesting. We're going to now listen to Mariam Helaluka speak about the roots of this left, and also how in reality they are aiding and abetting the mass murder and slaughter of freethinkers, the working class and progressive social movements in our region. Welcome, Mariam Helaluka. I wanted to ask you, what are the characteristics of a left that is increasingly pro-Islamist?
But the left is generally, traditionally against the state. So their analysis fails to take into account the proliferation of non-state actors, which have been there for several decades already. But they still stick to their old analysis, individuals versus the state.
And how does this affect the movement, progressive movement against the Islamists?
If I think of Algeria, for instance, we have been banging at the doors, not just of the left, but also the far left and also human rights organizations, to help us become more visible and give us legitimacy in our struggle against the fundamentalist far right, because that's what it is. It's a fascist type movement, disguised as a religious movement, but it's a political movement. And we had absolutely no success. So the arguments they are using to justify their position of abandonment of the left in Muslim countries is of two types. One is a very human rights approach, which is, it's their religion, it's their culture. And the second one is a more left approach. Well, they stand against oppressive and undemocratic government and corrupt governments, or they stand against imperialism. So neither of these arguments are valid. And if it's okay with you, I think I would like to develop this. On the first argument about it's their religion, it's their culture, one can say that they homogenize both religion and culture, and they essentialize both religion and culture. If one looks at the fact that Muslims are spread on all continents, it's really quite unbelievable to pretend that there's only one culture. And just looking at dress codes, from saris to boubous, from South Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa, there's a wide range of traditional clothing, and focusing on the Middle Eastern forms of clothing and of veiling, and pretending that this is religious instead of being adapted to geographical and circumstances, is absolutely crazy. I mean, how can anyone pretend there is one Muslim culture? As far as religion is concerned, of course, they are only concerned with the most retrograde and conservative interpretations of religion. They never look at what progressive thinkers in Islam say. And just for the sake of giving an example, Sohib Benshir, who is of Algerian descent and who was for a long time the great mufti of Marseille in France, gives this very interesting analysis of the veil being Islamic. He says, what was the purpose of the veil at the time of the Prophet? It was a way to separate the slaves who were forced to go half naked with their breasts uncovered, and the decent wives of well-to-do people who had to be covered in order precisely not to be harassed by the man in the street. So Benshir says this was a way to make sure that the dignity of these women was not attacked. And then he goes on saying, it's not a piece of cloth today which performs the same,
purpose.
Yes. Today, what gives assurance to a woman to be respected in society is the fact that she's educated. She's better equipped to face society, and that's how she conquers her dignity in society. So he concludes that the modern equivalent of the veil is education. So these are interpreters of the Quran who are never ever quoted, neither by the left nor by human rights organizations. And it's interesting because in so doing, they actually support the most conservative and the most aggressive interpretations of Islam. As an atheist myself, I'm not concerned with involving myself in reform of Islam, but just for the sake of saying that they take sides, even if they don't declare it, by promoting the views of the fascists in Islam.
What about, this whole argument that my enemy's enemy is a friend? Is that a permissible perspective to take? This is what the left often says they're
That's
doing.
what the left says, yeah. Well, the first part of my response was more about human rights. But the human rights views are contaminating the left and have been doing so for quite some time. Certainly since the 90s in Algeria, I've been aware of that we receive from the left non-partisan responses, supposedly apolitical responses, which are immediately taken from the philosophy of human rights organizations, and this is not the role of the left.
What is the role of the left?
The role of the left should be to be partisan and to openly take side, and hopefully with us, not with the fascists.
In what way can...
Let me finish with this question of the enemy of my enemy, etc. That brings me back to the argument that because people, quote unquote, the people, revolts against undemocratic, oppressive, corrupt governments, they need to be supported regardless of their political agenda. And supposedly because they oppose imperialist countries, which are well represented by our governments, let's say. So I think this is a terrible mistake for the left to believe for 1 second that fascist movements are anti-imperialist. The reform, the social reform that fundamentalist organizations are proposing the world over is zakat. That's, how do you say it? Give alms to the poor so that you don't disturb the social strata and the social power structure. So if this is going to fight against imperialism, let me laugh. What they fail to do, and I think this is absolutely unacceptable, is to have a political analysis of the right-wing, and in fact extreme right, nature of the fundamentalist movements. And I want to say that they have a lot in common with Nazis and fascists at the level of ideology. I know historians will jump to my throat because nothing can be compared to fascism in Europe at the time of the Second World War and before. But if we look at their ideology, they share with the Nazis and fascists the belief that they are a superior, not race, but creed. Nothing is superior to their creed. They base this fantasy, I would say, on the mythical past, whether it's the glorious past of Rome or the Aryan race, or in the case of Muslims, the golden age of Islam. And also based on that, they feel they have a right and a duty to eliminate the Untermensch. At the time of the Nazis, it was the Jews and the communists and the gays and the mentally handicapped, etc., etc. Gypsies, not to forget them. And now it's the Kuffers in a very general way, and also the Jews, the gays, etc. So I think this is extremely dangerous, and they have, as they say, God on their side. Just like the SS had the on their pocket, on their belt. Yeah. God on my side. Yeah. So I think failing to see the similarities and thinking we can ally as a left worldwide with these people is dramatic in my views. And I think the left in Europe and North America, but also in Asia and Africa, is participating in the elimination of any progressive thinking, any progressive movements all over the so-called Muslim world.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Mariama Helaloukas. I think she raises a hugely important point about the whole concept of my enemy's enemy is my friend. And the fact of the matter is that you can't just look at a movement for what it is against or perceived to be against or what it says it's against, but also one needs to look at its actual platform, what its policies are, what it's fighting for. And in effect, Islamism is a form of imperialism as well today.
And I agree. I think when we look at the experience of Mariama and many other people who we've interviewed on Bread and Roses, it clearly shows that the Islamist movement is a right-wing fascist movement. And when we analyse the practice, Mariama dissects it quite nicely, both on the level of, or the issue of human rights, as well as sort of the traditional left sort of ground. When you look at all those experiences, you'll see there's no benefit at all. It's actually quite a suppressive fascist movement in every aspect of the life, and in many different countries they act as the most right-wing groups, and anybody who supports these groups are, part of the fascist movement. I am sorry to say that groups who pretend to be left, they support these groups, they are part in the shadows of the fascist movement, and people need to wake up to danger of these groups.
And I mean, the reality is that this whole my enemy's enemy is my friend is an absurd sort of position to take. Let's say we're against the Islamic regime of Iran. That means then we should be for US imperialism and the bombing of Iran.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
we can be against both. We can see why both are not a progressive response, and we can give another response. And that's what the left has historically done, is to show another path. Aligning with the far right isn't going to help. It won't help us in our campaign against Sharia law here in Europe, and it definitely doesn't help aligning with the Islamists against even dictatorships in other countries, because they're part of the problem, not the solution.
No, absolutely, and the correct position, for example, when the United States attacked Iraq was, and we rightly said, we condemn that attack. We think that's part and parcel of reshaping of the Middle East and giving rise to the right-wing groups, which we've seen it's happened, as well as opposing the Islamists as the right-wing solution, the actually capitalist solution to the Middle East. And this is a justifiable position. Their position, it's quite negative, and it has, the only benefit of this is the rise of the Islamists, and they are part and parcel of this movement, and we have, without any shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't really even just say that they're it's not enough to say that they're, just standing side by side with the Islamists. They're actually apologizing for them, they're justifying them, they're legitimizing them, and they are creating space for them to have influence. And they're also, we often see, they're attacking the dissenters and those who are standing up to the Islamists as racists and Islamophobes. And so you can see how they work hand in hand with them to bring forth their inhuman agenda, whether it's here in Europe with Sharia laws and the burqa and Islamic schools and gender segregation, or in the Middle East and North Africa, where you see them supporting groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic regime of Iran, Assad in Syria, all at the expense of, large numbers of people.
Yes, they have morphed into the broader Islamist movement, and they are part and parcel of it, as you said. I agree.
And I think it's actually, I think Mariama talks about how it's just so astonishing to see, people who consider themselves progressive, political movements that consider themselves progressive, to see them siding with the fascists, and there's no excuse for it, there's no justification for it. It is appalling. It is a politics, as we've said before, a politics of betrayal. It is betraying people like Farkhunde in Afghanistan. It is betraying Avijit Roy and Rahman in Bangladesh, and it is betraying, the trade unionists in Iran to the secularists in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and elsewhere. It's something that has to be vehemently condemned. It is possible to have a progressive alternative to fascism, and that's not siding with another bunch of fascists. In Shocking News of the Week, we're talking about another Bangladeshi blogger by the name of Rahman who has been hacked to death. And he was hacked in such a bad way that the police could not identify him other than by looking at his identity card. And what's interesting
this is heartbreaking.
It is. I mean, it's outrageous how many of our free thinkers have to be slaughtered in this way until, governments take these Islamists seriously and act on them. Bangladesh has not done anything, the government, in stopping these Islamists. No one has been prosecuted for the murder of Avijit, for this murder, and for other murders that have taken place against bloggers.
And this is interesting that Bangladesh has a history of a strong secularism, and the state, the government has a bare responsibility, a serious responsibility.
Definitely.
Islamists as well, Islamists, naturally they are, the driving force for this. But the governments have a role to play. They justify, either they're scared of them or they work with them hand in hand. They have a role to play, and we need to put pressure on the Bangladeshi government to protect the right of the citizen to be able to criticize religion and enjoy free thinking as well. And unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that it seems some bystanders caught two of the men that hacked Rahman to death, and they were asked at the police why they did this, and they didn't know what a blog was, and they had never read his writings. So this is just a killing machine. They talk about offended Muslim sensibilities. They don't even know what they're offended about. They just want to kill anyone who doesn't think like them.
They rely on ignorance of the population that they exist, and it's a reality. But there are the right-wing driving forces who do that. All fascist movements use ignorance as the pillar of their activity.
I think it's important for us to really rage against this murder and Avijit Roy's murder and the attack on bloggers. If we look at the case in Afghanistan and Farkhunde's murder, we see that public protest and outrage has resulted in arrests and has resulted in the suspension of police who stood by. We have to make sure that not another blogger is killed in Bangladesh, and to do that, we need to embarrass the Bangladeshi government to take action and to take it now. The insane fatwa of the week is from ISIS, and they've got a fatwa about their brothers when they're playing table football. They're allowed to play it, but just in case they get confused, they've got to first decapitate the heads of the plastic football players, just in case one of them looks like Muhammad. Oh,
I know that. I mean,
that's just bad.
It's just silly, it seems like they've got a habit of decapitation. I mean, it's
even plastic figures are not safe,
and it's absolutely and to kill it. It's crazy. It only happens under Islamist in ISIS-controlled area. I mean, the reality is that the image for them it shouldn't exist. So this is a sort of little figure. So get rid of the image of anything that might look like Muhammad.
Scary.
Now the good news is from Sweden again, that the movement to end the ban on women entering stadiums in Iran is spreading. There was a football match between the Iranian football team and the Swedish football team in Stockholm, and there was huge protest outside and inside the stadium. Banners were opened and there were interviews, and it was great. Our very own Mahin Alipur, Shirin Shams and Maria Rashidi wrote in the Expressen newspaper in Stockholm, and there were a couple of TV interviews. It was great, and 5 of the Swedish football team came out in support of the end to ban the
brilliant.
women entering stadiums in Iran.
I mean, this is how absurd things are. You know, the fact that women cannot come into a stadium where men are playing. The excuse that the regime gives is because, oh, they don't want women to hear bad words and curse words being heard. They don't know that we women also curse and say bad words. And,
do you?
And never. And that I think our ears can manage it. I mean, it's just offensive. You know, the excuses they give to stop women from entering and participating in important events like sports. People love sports, especially in a place like Iran. Women, men love football, and there's so many incidences of, for example, women dressing up as men so they can sneak into the stadium. There's even been a film by Jafar Panahi on this issue called Offside, which is a lovely film if people haven't seen it, that just shows how desperate people are to get in.
So this movement is spreading in Italy. We saw earlier in March the 8th, there was a campaign in support of removing the ban. FIFA is getting involved, and the fact that some of the members of the Swedish team have come out in support is great, and there were a lot of good receptions in Sweden, and we wish well for everybody who's taken part in this campaign. Mahin Alipour, Shirin Shams, and Maria Rashidi, who's been leading this campaign.
And people really need to support the campaign to end a ban of women in football stadiums, for goodness sakes. Enough is enough.
Yes, I think, are we going to say goodbye? I think this is where we are now. Yes, go ahead.
I mean, let me carry on then. The thing is, we wanted to tell you that we've got 2 weeks off. We won't be able to do programs for 2 weeks. We'll be back on April 28th and 29th. The rest of us going, yes.
He's got 2 weeks off.
He thinks he does. He thinks he does, yeah. So, but we'll be back. So don't be disappointed. We'll be back. We know you're dying to see our programs. It'll only be 2 weeks. And we have an interview actually lined up already for our program with the wonderful Tunisian filmmaker Nadia El Fani.
Yes, great. We tell our viewers about your haircut later on in our next program. So from me and Mariam, for both of us, goodbye till next program.
Yes, bye. Hi, I'm Mariam Namazi.
And I'm Fariborz Puya.
We're hosting a program called Bread and Roses. It's a weekly program that's broadcast in Persian and English in the Middle East and North Africa, primarily Iran as well. And it's also shown on YouTube internationally. And
we've been doing this since last May. We're coming up to our year's anniversary, and we've had quite a lot of fun making these videos. We discuss taboo-breaking, free-thinking ideas. The Islamic regime of Iran has called us immoral and corrupt. And that's why you need to support us. We are the alternative voice in Middle East and North Africa. Of corruption and immorality. So do support us. Here's a short video from Patreon that explains how you can help us with even just $1 a week. That's nothing. Support us.
Patreon lets fans become patrons of their favorite artists and content creators. It's different than Kickstarter because it's not about one big project that requires lots of funding. It's more for bloggers or YouTubers or webcomics, anyone who creates on a regular basis. Here's how it works. When you become a patron, you're agreeing to give an artist a tip of an amount you set every time they release a piece of content, whether it's a new song, a video, or a recipe. You can set a monthly maximum to make sure that you're always within your budget. Choose an amount, enter your payment information, and you're done. Becoming a patron allows you to view and post in the artist's stream, and in exchange for your support, artists offer additional patron packages, which might include monthly Google Hangouts, music production tutorials, pre-sale concert tickets, or anything they can offer as a way to say thanks. Patreon, empowering a new generation of content creators.